when I think of Canada, Tk'emlúps, like we're a nation of good citizens. Like this is important to us as a value. And maybe it's sliding away from time to time. Like we maybe lose connection with that.
You're watching or listening to The Crisis Storm. Many would say that there is a crisis on our streets. Homelessness, addictions, and social impacts affect business, community, and individuals every day. Crisis Storm is a longer format episodic video series and audio podcast series that digs into the root causes of our street and social displacements through conversations with thought leaders, responders, and solution finders in the hope that we can inform and engage better conversations around these crises that are dividing and polarizing our community. Welcome to another episode of The Crisis Storm. We are on episode 11, and today I am joined by two incredible people who I will introduce in a moment. And we're talking about the hidden, all too often hidden crisis of child abuse in our communities. Tara and Shelly, let's start with introducing you and the organizations that you're part of. Tara, tell us a little bit about yourself and the organization.
Yeah. So I'm Tara Ettinger, the Executive Director of Big Bear Child and Youth Advocacy Center. But also, a little deeper for me, the passion goes to, I spearheaded the development of Big Bear about 8 years ago. And so it's been in our community now operational for almost 4 years. And it's what Big Bear does is we coordinate child abuse investigations and just help prioritize children and youth, their well-being during the process, during investigations, and offer a place instead of going to the RCMP detachment or courthouse, offering a real child-friendly, trauma-informed place where if they have to talk to police, being able to do it in a real comfortable environment, where again support is the priority, and just really understanding the needs of children, youth, and their families that are going through this. And it's a huge passion of mine, but just an amazing service to be a part of.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And Shelly, tell us a little bit about yourself and where you work.
Yeah, so my name is Shelly Dean, and I am the director at the Center for Response-Based Practice, which I started at around the same time.
Yeah.
About 8 years ago, as Tara was conceptualizing and bringing together a group of people to start Big Bear, I was doing the same thing, to start the Center for Response-Based Practice, which is a counseling organization in downtown Kamloops. We work with children and families around a wide variety of issues, and we're also a specialized service working around issues of violence with children and adults where violence is at issue. So we're working with victims and perpetrators, doing risk assessments and intervention services. And prior to that, Tara and I have been colleagues working in this community for a very long time. I won't say how long. In the nonprofit sector, and both come from a nonprofit background, working with children and families.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you for the work that both of you do. The elephant in the room. I think maybe some of our audience might be surprised that we're doing an episode on child abuse. But what I know is that I was guilty of assuming this is not a big thing. This is a rarity, an unfortunate rarity. But I was corrected on that when we started working together several years ago.
Right.
So the question, is child abuse a crisis in our community? Is this really a big thing?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, the national stats for children and youth being impacted by child abuse is 1 in 3. And so if we look at, the population of Tk'emlúps for children and youth, the last stat I could find was 2016 stats, so roughly about 19,000 kids. So if you do the math, that's hundreds of kids being impacted by child abuse, right? Like yeah, I mean, that's hundreds of kids, right? And so, we know that a lot of times it goes unreported. And so again, those numbers are, it's really hard to get a definite number of what that impact looked like, because there's just so many dynamics for a child to be able to disclose what's happening to them, and then again, getting this to the place where it can be investigated. And so those numbers are hard, but we know a solid number is 1 in 3. And so absolutely, we're looking at Big Bear working with a few hundred kids a year. And so when you think about the crises this is for a family going through this, it turns their world upside down, right? And so absolutely, and it's I've heard different professionals say it is like that silent crises, because these people are really needing to heal, and they're really in trauma, and they're really in shock, and they're trying to deal with the unimaginable. So they're not out there screaming and saying, help me. And a lot of times this is internalized, abuse is internalized, right? And so it is one of those silent crises where, we're thinking there's hundreds of families that are being impacted by this a year, but we can also expand on that by looking at what is the impact factor of every child that's hurt, and then those family members that are impacted by this, and those children maybe sharing with their friends and other kids getting information that, whoa, this is big stuff, right? How do I process that? So when it's not just the number of, we're working with several hundred kids a year, there's a big impact when you start really expanding that circle of who all this is impacting and who all this crises is, has an impact for, right?
So, just for the benefit of our audience, how do we define child abuse?
I was going to say, I think we also have to talk about what we're defining as abuse.
Yeah.
And what we always say is, when we would say that we're talking about violence against children, and when we say violence, that's broadly defined. So we're talking about physical and emotional and psychological and sexualized, and the offender or the perpetrator of violence would be one or more people. But now we're also looking at other forms. So when we think about the average age of children who are having pornography filtered into their lives at the age of 10, the average age in Canada is 10 years old. We have to now start thinking about pornography as a sexualized offense against children, because they have no way of preventing that from happening. And so this is changing the way that we need to be responding to what's happening to the children in our communities, and how they're being impacted by these things, and how we're defining things like abuse.
Right. Of course, the most important thing is to protect the child.
It is.
But I wonder, do we have a situation where this is staying under the radar? People keep quiet about these things because of the stigma attached to families that are discovered as having child abuse within them?
That's not an easy thing to answer.
I think one of the things that I've learned over the years is, and research shows that too, that being a human, this is not something we naturally want to accept, that this happens. And so, so when we do hear about child abuse or suspect child abuse, or we're, these are really hard topics to talk about. And it does show that it's, most people have a hard time talking about this, have a hard time accepting this, right? And so I think it comes down to, these are hard things to report, because if our brains are saying, no, that couldn't have happened, and we naturally just don't want to go there and imagine that a child is being hurt in such a way, it is natural for our brains to just question and try and justify, like, what am I hearing? And so it comes down to it, reporting becomes a challenge that way because of that, right? Because your mind is always saying, no, that couldn't have happened. No, I didn't hear that, right? And so.
And what if the offender is somebody you love and trust?
Yeah.
This is going to rip your family apart.
Absolutely.
And what if reporting, I mean, I think that depends where you're located in society, doesn't it? What if reporting is a risk to you, and your only history with the police has been dangerous? If you're an Indigenous person in Canada, only the stats show only 27% of Indigenous people in Canada are likely to go to the police when they're afraid or when a crime has occurred. Yeah. And so I think that's a difficult question, because I would say that depends.
Yeah.
Those are very good points. So when we look at wanting, I mean, I'm sure that everybody watching wants to help protect children. How do we know? How do we see? What are the signs of a child being abused, so that we don't run off and make assumptions that maybe be damaging?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think that's not an easy question to answer as well, because absolutely, there's lots of resources to help people understand that, is my child struggling, or is this child struggling? A lot of resources say, if there's sudden changes or in their moods, or they're, at school and so forth. But I always say take that with caution too, because we don't want to jump the gun and just assume, oh my goodness, like there's been a big change in my child's behavior, there must be something happening. And so it really comes down to communication and connection and having these dialogues. And so, whether they're having them at school or whether they're having, in families, it really is about keeping those connections open, keeping those communications open. And then also, consult, right? There's so many resources in Tk'emlúps that, Big Bear's open ourselves up to, anyone can call us and consult about that. But, even with child protection and RCMP, they're always there. They're just like, call. It doesn't have to be an official report. If you're not sure, just pick up a phone and consult and talk about it. That's the best thing we can do, right? So it's about keeping those communications with our kids open and always having dialogue and checking in and making that a habit every day. But then if you're feeling those gut feelings, just don't leave those, right? Consult and reach out. We have so many people in our community that we could reach out to.
Yeah, and I think a big one is to err on the side of believing kids. When they are speaking up, and they speak up in a way that is consistent with their developmental stage. And so it might be through their play or through language or to friends or in a variety of ways. But in whatever way they might be speaking up, err on the side of believing them.
Absolutely.
If child abuse is left unaddressed, where does that lead? Like, what do we know about unaddressed victims of child abuse?
Yeah, quite a bit. And in fact, what the research is really clear about is that there's much stronger evidence that the way that children or any victim of abuse or violence is responded to has more to do with how well they will be than the abuse itself. And so when a child experiences abuse in broadly defined, the importance of being believed, of receiving help, of having a positive social response in one way or another is essential. When that doesn't happen, when they're blamed, when they're not believed, when they're not helped, that is when the likelihood of them receiving a mental health diagnosis down the road, getting into trouble with the law, having trouble in school, these kinds of things, the likelihood of that is risen exponentially. And there's clear evidence of that. There's lots of research around it.
Yeah. You said that you work with the perpetrators as well as
yes,
the victims.
Yes.
What does that look like?
Well, it looks a lot of different ways. We do risk assessments as a way of trying to understand how to create safety or increase safety in families. And we also do intervention. So once we understand where the risk level is, to engage people further in increasing safety in an ongoing kind of way. And we're doing that all the time. So it's, in our minds, it's not adequate to be a service just working for victims of violence. We're not going to really get anywhere there. We need to be providing services for people who are using violence against others.
Yeah, prevention, but also, another way to look at that too is, we work with a lot of families where, it is a family member that is the alleged or was the one that was hurting the child. But a lot of times, they need to be reintegrated. They're reintegrated back into the family. And so how do you do that in a real healthy way, right? And so those services are so important on that aspect as well, because you need that healing for both ways, for the child, for the adult that was possibly doing the hurting, right? And so,
and when done well, and we're able to have the right kind of conversations, what we find over and over is that people are taking responsibility. They don't want to be hurting their children. They're honest about what they've done, and their children are able to speak to what has happened. And that's when you're able to create really, I think, adequate enough safety plans. And what we always say is, well, victims already know a lot about creating safety. They've been doing it for a long time. But the way to create safety is the person who's causing the harm. That's the person who will create safety. And so that's who creates the safety plan. What are you willing to do to create safety for your family? And that's who comes up with the safety plan.
Wow. Okay. That's interesting. Do you find that the person instigating the violence, causing the harm, is often someone that hasn't been able to deal with being a victim themselves?
Often. It's common.
Is that a sign of the times that we live in, or is it just coming to light more now? I mean, is it the all of these crises in community, the issue of finances, all of these stresses, the pressures, are they causing more violence against children?
I'd never want to say they're a cause.
Okay.
I think there's correlations. There's a lot of pressure on people. There's a lot of pressure on you. There's a lot of pressure on me. There's a lot of pressure on everybody, which is why I would not want to say it's a cause. Because if that were true, then there would be a real risk that you're going to become violent within your family. There's a decision that gets made that because of these pressures, there's permission to hurt other people. And that's just not true. That, like, it's not true that that causes this. But yes, I think there's a correlation.
Are you finding at all that the perpetrators are lacking coping mechanisms themselves, communication skills themselves, things of that nature?
No.
No?
I mean, I wouldn't say across the board that that's true either.
Mm. Are we doing enough in schools? System.
We work really closely with the school, with Big Bear, and I think, you know, that really does become key. I think, you know, the school they have great responses to children's needs, and yeah, I think they do a phenomenal job. And I think one of the things that, again, learning over the years is it really is about working together in the collaboration, right? Because it's like, you know, we know a small piece of what's going on for these children and their families and their lives. The school knows another piece, and maybe the RCMP knows another piece, and child protection and other agencies. And so, you know, a lot of the key to a CYAC success is that collaboration of service, right? Of working together and really having that wraparound approach to each situation. And so, so I think, you know, the schools are doing a really good job, but I think, you know, the key is really about the collaboration and working together, and making sure that every aspect of, you know, what this child is needing is you know, enhanced. You know, for a child to heal from the impacts of violence, you know, the more protective factors they can have in their life, the better the outcomes, right? And so success in school, connecting with peers, relationships, and just going on and on. And so, so I think that really is a key, is working together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any further thoughts about the
Yeah.
school system?
Yeah, I think I'm not as involved as Tara is in what's currently happening in the school systems. But I think the more that can be happening, the better. Because I think that the education system is such a great place to be talking about all of this, and that's where kids are, and that's where families are a lot of the time, the parents as well, and
that's where they spend the majority of their hours, right?
They
is
do.
at school. So yeah,
and it's in a sense it's the hub of a community, and So it's just the logical place to have lots of conversations, and I think lots of conversations are happening there. So the more of this kind of information, that can, and I know that it's hard sometimes to have conversations approved, even like when I'm talking about pornography and bringing in this kind of curriculum. It's not that easy. And I think it's essential. I think it's about the protection of children. It's not the mandate of anybody else to be protecting children in this way. It's not the mandate of the Ministry for Children and Families to see that as a child protection issue. It's so, unless it is created as the mandate of somebody, we're going to miss it.
Mm. So you see that really as part of the mandate of the school system?
Well, it's not that I see it that way, but I think it's important that it becomes the mandate of somebody. It's that serious and it's that pervasive. There's no parental control that kids can't get past if they want to. And they do want to, because they're kids. And that's as old as time. The difference is it's not erotica anymore. It's not just naked bodies anymore. It's violence, and it's serious. Mm-hmm. So what they're looking at has changed.
Mm. Okay, time for a quick break.
Sure.
We're going to grab some water, we're going to breathe, and we're going to be right back with more from Tara and from Shelly right after these messages from our sponsors.
In Tk'emlúps, we're not just lawyers, we're forward law. We're about moving you forward. Approachable, caring, and experienced. That's who we are. From contract writing to estate planning, civil litigation to employment law, whatever your need, we've got your back. We push for fair resolutions. We're not afraid to take on the tough cases. Forward-thinking estate planning, strong advocacy, and unwavering support. Forward Law, your partner in progress. Call us today, because your future deserves nothing less. Welcome to the heart of business in Tk'emlúps, Southgate Business Center, your one-stop destination for all your office needs. Conveniently located at 970 Laval Crescent, Southgate Business Center offers more than just office space. Whether you're a startup, a freelancer, or a well-established business, we've got you covered. Need a professional office space? Our offices provide the ideal environment for productivity and success. Planning a meeting or presentation? Elevate your business with our conference room available for rent. At Southgate Business Center, we understand the importance of efficiency. Our secretarial services ensure you have the support you need so you can focus on what matters most, growing your business. For office rentals, conference rooms, secretarial services, and more, contact Southgate Business Center at 250-374-9233 or visit us at 970 Laval Crescent in Tk'emlúps. Southgate Business Center, your destination for success in the heart of Tk'emlúps. Call us today and experience a new level of business excellence.
We are back with Tara and Shelly talking about child abuse, and we're gonna turn the tables a little bit here on Big Bear Child and Youth Advocacy Center. Help us understand what was the process for a child, for a family, in reporting child abuse prior to there being the center actually running here in Tk'emlúps, Big Bear Child and Youth Advocacy Center. Tell us what that process was like before Big Bear and how it's changed now that Big Bear is running here in Tk'emlúps.
Right, yeah. So essentially, when when a child, indicates that that they've been impacted by trauma or abuse in some way, then that, hopefully that turns into a report with child protection or RCMP. And so it's, mandated in Canada for obviously child protection and RCMP to look into that and investigate that. And so what that includes is usually the first part of the investigations is talking with the child to better understand what happened, what occurred, and so they can put all the pieces together and that's what basically creates an investigated case. And so before Big Bear, children were brought down to the RCMP detachment to have that conversation, which is called a forensic interview with a police officer. Sometimes we do have child protection doing those interviews as well. And so basically, when you think about Big Bear, it's the biggest thing is taking them out of those environments. And so, those conversations, those forensic interviews are now happening at Big Bear. And so, the decor of Big Bear, you've been there, it's really warm and welcoming, and just right away we want to create a space where, children and families are feeling more comfortable and less that this is a scary process, right? And so, and so again, we prioritize really how are these kids and families doing when they're coming into Big Bear, and slowing things down a little bit, right? And ensuring that when the police come to Big Bear, they're not in their uniforms, and we call everyone by their first names, and just, if they're hungry or thirsty, and it just accommodate whatever they're needing and go at a pace that works for them. We've had some kids that just really just need to be help with some mindfulness and grounding before the interview, and sometimes that has taken over an hour, and that's what's so nice is we're not in a rush pace. It's, what are they needing at this time? And then again, the big thing is that collaboration with so many agencies involved to really understand kind of the whole picture of the child and the family, their culture, communication styles, and just so we can really create a process to just create an opportunity for that child to say what they need to say, and just have the best opportunity to be able to do that. And so just learning so much about both the child and the family, and putting all these things together so we can have a real a holistic approach as far as really understanding their needs. And then another huge aspect of Big Bear is research. There is research out there to show that a lot of times children and families are not getting connected to the healing support services that they're needing after to recover from this trauma or the impacts of the trauma. And so a big part of the CYAC's Big Bear is having these long-term follow-ups with our families and our children to basically, we kind of go by the motto of how are you doing and what do you need, and just helping with, are you connected to the services that you're needing right now? Do you have enough supports? And it's really important that it's long-term, because a way a child may internalize being impacted by abuse when they're 7 can really change when they're 10. And so it's so important to have that long-term follow-up, and really understanding, helping them also understand, what is it that your healing needs are, and that's specifically for you. And like Shelly was saying when we were on break, sometimes it isn't counseling, right? And so sometimes it's a connection to a group, or sometimes it's a deeper connection with their culture,
or an animal.
Or an animal. We were talking about, how research is just showing that phenomenally, how animals are so therapeutic, right? And so we have to look at healing needs so individualistic and not stereotype that because this happened, this is where we're going to go. And so
We don't have an answer.
no, absolutely.
There's no one answer.
Absolutely. And I think that's what makes Tk'emlúps also so wonderful, is we just have so many services that it really is utilizing, knowing what's out there and helping families and kids connect to these services, right? So they have the best opportunity to really heal from the impacts of this trauma.
I know that some people, when we look at the crisis, for example, of homelessness, we've been dealing with this for decades.
Yeah.
And, it's often thought that, well, if we could just do X, whatever X is, if we could just, set up 200 more housing units, there's 200 homeless people, 200 housing units, we got it solved. That'll fix everything. And sometimes we put those solutions in place and we see a difference, and sometimes we don't see a difference. 4 years ago, we didn't have Big Bear. We had the concept that you were working on, but not the application of that concept. Have you seen a huge difference, a change? Is it making an impact now with having the process in place? Tell me about that.
Yeah, I think, the larger systemic issues, those take a lot of time, right? And the overall hope of having, when you have a CYAC in your community, is that it brings more awareness, it brings more opportunity for children and youth to say, you know what, yeah, I need to share what's happened with me. Maybe make it easier for community members to report or consult or just work in partnership as far as what that's going to look like. So the bigger factor, that takes time to really understand the impacts in a community. At an individual level, absolutely. It's, I get the privilege to see really how this has changed the trajectory for some children's lives and families' lives, as far as having that support right at the onset of when it's first known when a child has been impacted by abuse. Watching them go through this kind of state of shock and turmoil in the very beginning. And then, unfortunately, investigations can last for a few years. And so watching families go through that. But I guess the magic of it all is being able to witness how, with that support and the connections to community services and just everyone working together, absolutely, we have seen some really incredible families heal and situations change for kids.
It's telling that you say we see some incredible families heal. The tendency, I think, from a human standpoint, is to think of them as broken families, not incredible families. It's just an interesting choice of words.
Well, and I think, the vision absolutely at Big Bear, it's really honoring, there's a lot of strength in these kids coming to Big Bear, right? And there's a lot of, I just look at them with incredible strength and admiration, because they are making the choice at the end of the day to come to Big Bear and share what had happened to them. And that takes a lot of bravery, and that takes a lot of courage. And so absolutely every child that comes through that door is gonna know that. We're gonna really, let them know like how proud we are of them, because this really did take a lot of courage and bravery, and we're just so proud of them. So absolutely every family and every child that comes through that door are pretty incredible people.
Tell me more about the connection between Big Bear Child and Youth Advocacy Center and the Center for Response-Based Practice.
Yeah, sure. I want to say as far as the difference of having Big Bear in the community, one other thing, if I'm not mistaken, that when a family goes to Big Bear, they're the only family in the center.
Yeah.
And that's unheard of. Like, that's so unusual, because in any other resource, you enter and become part of a very fast-paced environment, which is the exact opposite of what is needed when you're in distress. So I think that Big Bear is the only place that I'm aware of that where you will enter and be the only family in that resource. And that, among other things like that Tara's just mentioned, like professionals being called by their first name, police in plain clothes.
They even the staff and the police come through a completely backdoor entrance, not through the same entrance as the family.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
All things that just really indicate a high level of respect. That has created such respect from professionals who are referring, and trust in the resource. And so I think that it is a very important piece of information to mention.
Thanks.
Compared to the alternative. And the alternative was always with trepidation, like, it is the law in Canada to report to the RCMP and MCFD, and that can go very well. And sometimes it doesn't. And you felt a responsibility to say both things. But that's not required anymore. And that's very, very helpful.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and so as far as our connection, yeah, there's a real courage to come forth and make this report. And also, I would say that when something like this happens in the life of a child and a family, I think most of us would hope to have the kind of, I don't know, bravery and just intelligence that children show when they're in the distress of being harmed in these kinds of ways. And so it's not hard to be in awe of the kinds of things that Tara's talking about, the kinds of things that you get to hear and I get to hear in the course of doing this work. And so I think this is a big part of our connection over the years is, yeah, just the incredible stories of that come from children and families. And so they come forward to do this, and then we've had conversations about what's next, and we provide service to children and families about that piece and what's next for them. And sometimes they want to get a puppy or horseback riding lessons or something else in nature, and sometimes they want family counseling, or the child wants to meet with somebody alone, and then they might come to us, or a different kind of counseling service. But that's where we connect. And Tara and I have talked about a dream of creating a specialized service just for children. that is a partnership between Big Bear and the Center for Response-Based Practice. And so this is a dream that we hold.
What would that specialized service look like over and above what you already do in your practices?
Yeah, well, what we already do is multi-service. Like we work with adults and children and of all ages and for a wide range of issues. And we have a room that is dedicated just for children in a building where lots of people are coming. And so this idea of what about just having a separate space that is really designated for children and designed for children, where it's just about them.
And immediate. And I think, the biggest, I can kind of wrap up our connection in one word is just trauma, and just really our goal to really try and decrease the impact of this trauma that children and families are going through. And so when Shelly and I continue to have conversations about, what children and youth are needing when they've experienced this kind of trauma is immediate, right? And so not always is that available right at the onset. And so the vision is, helping kids, especially through those deep emotions that come with experiencing trauma, right? And the worry is that it's very common for kids to feel, blame or shame or embarrassment. And it's just like, if we can mitigate that, if we can help a child not feel like that tomorrow, that's the goal, right? Of not having kids, spend another day feeling that way about something that they in no way are a part of. This is something that had happened to them, right? And so again, there is that immediacy for kids to have that opportunity to,
and not having them sit on wait lists.
And not sit on wait lists. Like, this is the urgent crises, is why should a child spend a day feeling embarrassed, ashamed, blaming themselves?
Or being blamed.
And
so working also with families of those children around some of those issues, so that the families can be as supportive as possible. They're often wondering, what do we say? What should we do? How can we be as supportive as possible? And sometimes the blame is they're inadvertently blaming, or sometimes I guess it's intentional, but I think lots of times it isn't. And so I think the whole family needs support, and
Absolutely.
not just the child. And so we do take a family approach always when we're working with children. So when we're talking about designing a space for children, that's not at all with the idea of excluding family. We always take a family approach. But I do think that children need a space where it's designed for them and they feel comfortable. Way too often we're bringing children into adult designed spaces and thinking that this is going to be good for them. And it isn't. They don't feel comfortable. That's not where they're likely to want to talk. They're just not.
And so, just to be clear, the idea of creating this space that's designed to make children feel a lot more at ease and less stress, you're talking about that from the post-report therapeutical stage, because we already now have that.
That's right.
With the report and discovery stage.
Yes.
Okay. That's fantastic.
Yeah, and to touch on what Shelly's talked about, the real importance too of focusing on the whole family, right? Because absolutely, it's the child has all these emotions trying to deal with the impact of this trauma, but we also have to remember these caregivers are in shock too a lot of times, and so now they're trying to parent a child that that the child's in trauma and the parent's in trauma, and so it is so important to support the whole family that's supporting the family, right? I mean, the well-being of that parent is really impacting that child as well. So yeah, so you do need to look at it holistically and involve the whole family, right?
They're all responding to what's happened and this whatever form of violence has occurred, but they're all going to be responding to it in a different kind of way.
Right.
And that's, it's difficult for everybody. And so nobody can be left out.
The other piece I want to add to too, I think we have a good connection about that, is we really need to take care of the people that do this work.
Yeah.
And so, that's a real commonality between response-based and Big Bear, is that we really have to not only look after the staff of Big Bear, but remembering that, the RCMP that are coming in, the child protection people that are coming in, these are,
the people who are working in nonprofit, the first responders, the list goes on.
Absolutely. And so, Big Bear's embedded in that, response base is embedded of that we need to take care of that, right? And
what does that care look like? That I know that you've implemented some strategies at Big Bear. Can you tell us a little bit about what does that attention to care for the caregivers, for those frontline workers, what does that look like?
Well, we have to look at, so the impacts of trauma, just not on the child and the family, but the impact of hearing trauma over and over and over again from these first responders. And so the thing about trauma is how we interpret what we hear or how we feel about what we hear has everything to do with what we've experienced, what we've learned, who we are. And so we don't know what story is going to impact, how it's going to have an impact, or what story is going to have an impact. And so it's not like you can just be ready that, this was a difficult story and I'm going to be impacted. And so it really, it's one of those things that can really sneak up on first responders or people that are doing this, right? And I think especially with first responders, they're trained to respond to crises. And so a lot of times there's that lack of awareness for how impacted you were by what you just heard, that sometimes that just goes buried. And it's so easy for that secondary trauma or vicarious trauma, right, to just kind of sneak up on you and not even realize it, because you're just so busy responding to the crises at hand that there isn't necessarily the time to reflect and go, how was I just impacted by what I just heard, by what I just witnessed? And so when you think these first responders, this is daily, numerous times a day. And so the chances of them being impacted by what they've witnessed or what they heard is very probable, is very high that that's going to happen. And so, especially times are busy and a lot of places are short-staffed. And so I guess, another crisis is how do we address that? Are we taking care of ourselves? And so I think that's just, as Shelly and I talk, it's just like, I think we can go on and on and on about that, right? As far as things that we can implement and things that we can do better, and how can we take care of each other who do this very important work of this, right? And so that's another connection. So
like I've heard such interesting stories from various first responders of where they just had a practice of just a really great unit or something, and a really great I won't say who because anyway, leader, where they just were debriefing all throughout the shift. They just had that way and that connection, and they were debriefing all throughout the shift. And the leader was kind of also a friend and checked in at the end of the shift and invited them all to his house really regularly. And they sat around and they just like weren't talking about work, but they were really just hanging out. But then they also would talk about work when they needed to. And the description from that person was that they were feeling really good, even in these times, really good, really healthy, really grounded. So again, when you look at the responses, the social responses that people are receiving and how well or unwell they feel, it's so connected. And when those are taken away or absent, it has a direct impact on, again, how well or unwell the mental health diagnosis that might be connected, whether or not somebody's feeling like they might be struggling with depression, anxiety, addiction, some other, whatever, or just unhappy or traumatized by what it is they're experiencing. And so I think, when I think of Canada, Tk'emlúps, like we're a nation of good citizens. Like this is important to us as a value. And maybe it's sliding away from time to time, like we maybe lose connection with that. But I think it's in us, like this is in us and who we are. And so when I think of that story and this crew who are staying connected, like we cannot lose touch or we'll lose ourselves here. This is too hard. And this leader who's making sure to like hang on to this crew. I just think, yeah, that's right. That's where it's at. That's what we need to do. And we need to do it in a bigger way.
Yeah.
Because if we don't, we're going to lose the plot here. Which is, I think, what you're describing. Like, how do we do that? But it doesn't take a special qualification in mental health. It's just connection.
Yeah.
Connection.
Absolutely.
We're going to talk more about that with some wrap-up words right after one more break to recognize our sponsors. We'll be right back with the Crisis Storm.
In Tk'emlúps, we're not just lawyers, we're forward law. We're about moving you forward. Approachable, caring, and experienced. That's who we are. From contract writing to estate planning, civil litigation to employment law, whatever your need, we've got your back. We push for fair resolutions. We're not afraid to take on the tough cases. Forward-thinking estate planning, strong advocacy, and unwavering support. Forward Law, your partner in progress. Call us today, because your future deserves nothing less. Welcome to the heart of business in Tk'emlúps, Southgate Business Center, your one-stop destination for all your office needs. Conveniently located at 970 Laval Crescent, Southgate Business Center offers more than just office space. Whether you're a startup, a freelancer, or a well-established business, we've got you covered. Need a professional office space? Our offices provide the ideal environment for productivity and success. Planning a meeting or presentation? Elevate your business with our conference room available for rent. At Southgate Business Center, we understand the importance of efficiency. Our secretarial services ensure you have the support you need so you can focus on what matters most, growing your business. For office rentals, conference rooms, secretarial services, and more, contact Southgate Business Center at 250-374-9233 or visit us at 970 Laval Crescent in Tk'emlúps. Southgate Business Center, your destination for success in the heart of Tk'emlúps. Call us today and experience a new level of business excellence.
Okay. So we're back for wrapping up our session here with Tara and Shelly from Big Bear and the Center for Response-Based Practice about the impacts on children in our community from the crisis of child abuse. I think probably one of the best ways to kind of wrap this up is to talk about what's next from a future perspective for Big Bear and the Center for Response-Based Practice. What do you see is really needed in order to move forward in a good and healthy and productive way?
Yeah, I think for us, our hope is to develop a separate resource that is specific to meet the needs of children who have been to Big Bear, have made a disclosure, or maybe they've just decided not to disclose, but they are victims of violence and require a specific resource. And that's the decision that they've made to access professional services. We want a resource that is designed for children and their families, that is somewhat apart from the other services that we offer. So for us, that's the next step, and that's the immediate goal, to find a way to create a resource like that.
So that's sort of a longer term sort of therapeutic support system.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it's longer term, sometimes it goes really quickly. It really depends on what's needed for that family or that child. Now, sometimes it's surprisingly not long. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I would have assumed that it's always a long process.
No, it is not always a long process.
Okay. Good to know.
Yeah.
Final thoughts about misconceptions or perspectives that you really want to see changed in our community?
I think just, hopefully between, all the services and the conversation that we're having here, it just creating opportunities so we can talk about this more, right? And so it doesn't become this silent crises, right? Because that isn't what children need.
Right.
Children need the opportunity to be able to talk about this. And if we're not comfortable talking about this, how the heck are we expecting our kids to be able to be comfortable to talk about this?
Is it possible that we see a lot of child abuse and this type of crisis in our community because we don't talk about it enough?
I think it adds to that, definitely, right? It's never been a subject that's been easy to talk about. It's never been highlighted as a topic that we want to talk about. And so, I think, there's more initiatives throughout Canada, throughout the world that are helping to promote the awareness and the ability for people to talk about that. But I think, if anything, that's something that, would be a dream going forward, is to be able to create a world where it's just like, these are, whether it's connecting with resources to help us talk about it, or helping families being able to talk about this at a family level, whatever it may be. But it just, creating more opportunities so this is open dialogue and creating more opportunities for kids to feel comfortable to be able to talk about it, right?
I would say, I think it's the same for Tara. It's our experience that kids want to talk about this, and given the opportunity, they will, and they absolutely have the right to tell the truth. And so to remove the barriers and that's what we're trying to do, is remove the barriers that prevent them from talking and prevent them from their natural way of telling the truth about what's happening or has happened. And that's up to adults. That's not them. That's up to adults. And so, yeah, it isn't easy. It isn't what anyone wants to be talking about, but it is in the best interest of kids.
And on the break, we were talking about the conversations are happening anyways, whether you're part of it or not as a
Absolutely.
as a parent or an adult.
They are telling each other.
Yeah.
Like, let's be honest. They are talking. They're just not talking to people who can create safety necessarily for them. But very often when we get to ask them if they've told anyone, they've told people.
Okay. More information. If there's, I mean, is there anything that you think that our audience should really know or understand? Is there a way that they can help? How can they find more information?
Yeah, email is probably always our best, and then there's the us being able to track that, people are making inquiries and so forth. So email is always great. And again, it's, opening up the services to, anytime people have questions or just want to talk about stuff, we're always available for that, right? And I think there's so many great services in our community where they feel the exact same thing, right? It's just like, and I think that's what's so magical about a good community is people can call agencies to just say, I have a question about this, and I think anyone would bend over backwards to give them the information that that people are needing or just wanting to consult about or collaborate about. And so just really reach out at any time that people are needing information. And
okay. What's the email address for Big Bear that
so info@bigbearcyc.ca for us.
Okay, we'll put that up on the screen.
Yeah.
And ours is admin@rbpinterior.com.
Okay, fantastic. Any further thoughts from yourself, Shelly?
I agree with what Tara's saying, is reach out. If try to have as many conversations with kids as possible from whatever vantage point you're at, and as open as possible. And talk to people, find the services if you're not sure what to say, because that's not uncommon. It's hard, but there's lots of services that have really great information and can help with that. Can help with how to talk to kids about pornography, about violence, about bullying, about all of the topics that are a bit tricky with how to bring them up.
Thank you both for everything you do in our community and for joining us here at the studio. And please reach out to Tara and to Shelly if you have any questions or thoughts. And also we'll put a link here in the description if you'd like to take a tour of the Big Bear Child and Youth Advocacy Center. You can watch the video that we did last year, and we'll also include links to a documentary that we did with Big Bear Child and Youth Advocacy Center called, can't remember what
what is it?
Silence.
Silos. Yeah, oh my goodness.
Violence, Silence, and Silos.
Yeah.
So you can check that out in the description link below this podcast video. We'll see you next time on The Crisis Storm. You're watching or listening to The Crisis Storm. Many would say that there is a crisis on our streets in Tk'emlúps and in cities across North America. Homelessness, addictions, and social impacts affect business, community, and individuals every day. Crisis Storm is a longer format episodic video series and audio podcast series that digs into the root causes of our street and social displacements through conversations with thought leaders, responders, and solution finders in the hope that we can inform and engage better conversations around these crises that are dividing and polarizing our community. All of us at the Crisis Storm podcast would like to thank our sponsors for their support and care for the community of Tk'emlúps and its residents. Southgate Business Centre and Forward Law are two such sponsors that deserve your consideration. If you found value in this episode of Crisis Storm, please don't forget to give us a like and share with others. Thank you for joining the conversation and being part of the solution to the many crises that we face in our community. Crisis Storm is a production of Mastermind Studios in association with the AIM Canada Mentorship Society. For more information on the Crisis Storm podcast series and the documentary film project titled Finding a Way Forward, please visit findingawayforward.com. Crisis Storm can be watched on YouTube, along with listening to the audio versions on many podcast platforms, including Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Pocket Casts, and RSS. If you've got questions for the producers of this show or suggestions on topics and guests for future shows, please send them to info@mastermindstudios.ca.